This is the sort of bit of an introduction video to what we've been doing, although it's the last of all the videos. But it's a summary as quickly as we can of everything we found. I think we can draw 5 main conclusions from all the videos we've done, which I'll try and include so that you can see them. Firstly, you can't soften a hard track by adding water to it. In fact, it actually makes it worse. Drained sand retains about 25% of its weight as water. The only way you can get more water into a track is by adding more water to make it waterlogged, but the waterlogged tracks are the worst of all worlds. I've always said you shouldn't treat a frozen track like a road. Turns out you should treat a frozen track like a road. Moisture meters almost useless on winter tracks. We haven't done any work on summer tracks yet. Hot weather, what happens in hot weather? Most tracks injury rates increases in hot weather, but we haven't done any work on that yet. Okay, I take the view most injuries are track related for 2 reasons. Firstly, that if you have poor areas of track, dogs will tend to avoid them as they run on them, and they will move away from those areas of track, and in the process of doing that cause collisions with other dogs, or at least put other dogs, unbalance them. The other side as well is if you've got a track that provides poor support or a slippery surface as a dog corners, if they get a knock, their leg will go outwards. If the track supports them, they will maintain balance and power their way around the bend. If the leg gives way, they'll not only get injuries themselves, they're far more likely to trip over or collide with another dog. You end up with a multiple dog collision. Some of the dogs are going to go flying over. It doesn't look like a track fault, it looks like a grading fault because the dogs collided, but the track is an element involved in that. It's quite likely very few injuries actually are completely untrack related. What are we looking for in a good track? We want a surface that absorbs shock as the paw comes down and hits the ground, so we want a bit of give in the surface. This is not that track. Also, we want to stop sideways movement. We want to stop the paws sliding sideways or backwards as the power takes off there. We don't want the paw sliding backwards. As the dog goes around the corner, we don't want the paw sliding that way. Now, this is a track that we've treated like many tracks are treated in real life. Yesterday we repeatedly harrowed this track just down to the level of 1 inch and put water on it, and we did that roughly every 20 minutes in the way that a track would be treated during racing. This track, as you can see, is hard and unforgiving. Would you brace your dog on that? I wouldn't. Now, let's see how it goes with the pencil test. Actually feels quite good with the pencil test. You would accept that track. And the pen test, very much wider pen there. This is a test I actually quite like doing on the track because I've usually got a biro in my hand at the time. But as you can see, it's not the greatest way to test a track. Okay, can we soften that by pouring water on it? Well, no, why would we really, if you think about it? Sand is compacted down. It's every time you put water on, it actually washes the smaller particles through to the lower layers of sand, compacts the sand more, consolidates the sand, makes it harder. Sand is obviously heavier than water, about 1.5 times heavier. Is it going to help pouring water on that? No, why would it? It's not going to make the slightest difference at all. It's made the surface wet, that will stay wet until it's soaked through. But the underlying track is still hard. The only way really that water makes a difference is when you actually waterlog a track. As I said, sand holds about 25% of its weight as water. If you increase the water beyond that, the track starts to become waterlogged. The sand starts to behave in a completely different way. It becomes a colloid. Colloids are hard with quick impacts, soft if the movement is slow. Now, just to go back to what a dog does, a dog hits the ground hard with the paw as they run, but for the time that paw is on the ground, the paw is not moving in relation to the sand. As the dog's weight goes forwards, he'll start to push back with his legs, and you'll start to get that's when you need the resistance to the movement of the sand. If you've got sand that gives way very, very easily, at that point the dog will slip. Same applies going around a bend. If you've got sand that gives way very easily, at that point the dog's paw will go outwards. He'll get muscle injuries and he's likely to collide with other dogs. Why are very wet tracks slow? I think it's because of that. I think it's because the paws slip and they can't get power onto the track. They can't actually get a grip. To some extent it may be because the dogs sense that the surface is unstable and probably slow down to a degree as well. I don't know how much of that is involved. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to try and convert this to a flooded wet track, a waterlogged track if you like. I don't know how this is going to work. Oh, not too bad. Oh dear, we lost a fair bit of the sand there. That's a waterproof drainage membrane there. As you can see, we had a gravel base to that track. Try and get it somewhere similar to what you would see in real life. Okay, this is going to be the waterlogged track, so we'll add water. We'll keep adding water. Okay, we're looking for a water level sort of not far off the surface of the track here when we do this, and that's a state a lot of tracks get into because people keep adding water because they think the sand is too hard, and of course what you end up with is a waterlogged track. How can you tell if a track is waterlogged? Well, if you make a hole in it, this is obviously an extreme version. It fills with water. We've all seen tracks where the dogs have run over them and they've left paw prints, and the paw prints have filled with water. As I say, this is a very extreme example of that, but you can see what happens. Water is filling up that hole. That means your water table, if you like, just treat it as you would any other ground, is very close to the surface. Now the problem is, if you actually test this track, we just tip off a little bit more of the water, you would think probably that it's a nice soft track, and how could a dog get injured on that? What's starting to happen here is, as we've poured off more of the water, the track's getting a little bit firmer, still soft, and you would think, well, okay, that's not too bad, we'll get it drier than that, and that will actually support the paws and actually be quite soft as the dog lands, quite cushiony. But as I said, sand behaves as a colloid when it's waterlogged, which is to say the particles of sand are suspended freely in the water. Just get rid of a bit more water now just to demonstrate that. Okay, again, paw prints filled with water. Colloids, as I say, behave differently. There's a big separation between the particles of sand now. Colloids are resistant to very sudden impacts, but they're rubbish at slow movement. Don't forget, that slow movement is where the paw starts to move gradually as the dog's weight moves forward, as they start to power away with that paw after each landing. Likewise, around the bends, no resistance. This is a dangerous track. The wet track, the waterlogged track, the undrained track, the track that hasn't got enough drainage, has had too much water added to it, is the worst of all worlds. It gives poor cushioning against impact as the paw lands. It gives poor support against sideways movement. Oh, there go my notes. Okay. So, we've just explained why you can't solve the problem of a hard track by adding water. There are, however, things you can do to a hard track to soften it, and they're all mechanical. Either you make holes in it like that, or you harrow it like that and break up the sand. The reason a track is hard, regardless of its water content, is because when there's pressure on it, the sand has nowhere to go. You have to make somewhere for that sand to go. If you harrow it like that, as the paw hits the ground, the sand can move in a controlled way. Holes do the same. Holes, I think, are more practical between races because you don't have to bother trying to compact the sand afterwards. If you harrow the sand between races, your time is against you getting it workable again, but I don't think you need to compact the sand as much as is generally done after harrowing. I think light compaction is probably enough. You don't want it compact. You don't want to get back to that hard sand that you had before. You want movement in that sand. Probably lighter equipment with turf tyres on, probably to spread the load, to compact it down afterwards. The problem, I think the reason you have to compact a lot after harrowing a track is because using heavy equipment, you've got thinnish tyres and you're getting bands of very compacted sand, so you have to make sure the whole track is consistent. To do that, you have to work across the track with your tractor. That's a lot of compacting. I personally think it might be better to try using lighter weight equipment, smaller equipment, wider tyres, and not try and compact the sand down as much. That might be a way of doing it. The other thing, water is quite slow to move through compacted sand anyway, so if you're putting heavy equipment over, you'll squeeze the water out in bands along the track. You'll have other areas in between that are wetter. That's a problem with consistency of the track there. There is something else we could try. It's not done at the moment. I don't know why not. I'll come back to it in a second as well in relation to frozen tracks. All weather surfaces, they're generally sand with something mixed in, usually rubber crumb. That would allow a degree of springy movement in the sand, and it would take some of the emphasis off the water there. Okay. Frozen sand. Well, we haven't got a demonstration out at the moment, but we did lots of videos. I would say the videos we've got are all done live. They weren't rehearsed. We didn't know ourselves what was going to happen in any of those tests, or most of the tests we didn't. And sometimes the results were quite a surprise. I think also I've made conclusions after the end of some of those videos, which I've since revised. I think I've understood now what happens in wet tracks, whereas when we were doing the original demonstration of wet tracks I didn't. So there's some contradictions if you actually look at the other videos. Okay, frozen tracks, we haven't got a demonstration. I think we're getting it spectacularly wrong, actually. Firstly, obviously, it's much better to stop a track freezing than it is to deal with it once it's frozen. Adding salt to the track needs to be done before the track freezes, before the water in the sand freezes. Salt does not defrost ice. Salt does not melt ice. You'll see gritting lorries on roads. They tend to get them out about 3 or 4 o'clock in the afternoon. They're trying to get the salt on the roads before that water freezes. Now, the salt needs to dissolve evenly throughout all the water in the sand. And we know that the sand retains about 25% of its weight as water. Now that gives you some interesting calculations. If you add salt to water to 5% by weight, that protects the water from freezing down to minus 1.5 degrees. 10% by weight, minus 6 degrees. I've said before, I can't really say it too often, salt does not melt ice. What it does do, it dissolves in water and lowers the freezing point of that water, or it dissolves in water that you've created on the track and prevents that from refreezing. It also does cool the water to a degree in the process. So the process of dissolving salt in water actually cools the water, but it stops it refreezing. How much salt do you need to get 5% solution on the track? Well, 400 metre track, 12 foot wide, depth of sand 4 inches. I reckon that's about 220 tonnes of sand. We know that 220 tonnes of sand will retain 25% of its weight in water, so that's 55 tonnes of water in a track. You want 5% of that by weight to be salt. 5% of salt in over 55 tonnes of water works out to 2.7 tonnes over the whole track. That's 7 kilograms per metre of track, which is nearly 2 kilograms per square metre of track, or 200 grams per square foot. If you put that amount of salt on a track, you'll find it looks like it's snowed. It's very obvious that you've put it there. But the salt that you've added to your track once it's frozen will not melt the ice. You need something else to do that. The only way you're going to melt the ice is to warm it up. It's really that simple. Nothing else is going to melt the ice. You might break it up into smaller parts, but that really isn't going to help. So your only option there is to get some energy into the track. What happens on a road, if they don't get the salt on before the water freezes, the water does freeze, but if it's a busy road, you get a lot of traffic over it, the tyres as they go over that road generate heat. What I'm suggesting, I'm open to comments on this, because it's something we haven't tried in real life, and some of you may be doing this already. None of what we've found is new. I don't think we've made any sort of breaking revelations. If you like, we've reinvented the wheel when we did these videos, but it's still, we've tried to make practical ways of demonstrating the things that we've found, really. So just to recap, 2 kilograms per square metre of salt will protect you down to minus 1.5 degrees. If the temperature is above minus 1.5 degrees, that will do. If you want more protection, if the temperature is lower than that, you need to add more salt. You need to add salt to your frozen track to the amount that you require to protect your water from freezing, really, even though it's actually frozen. So don't harrow the track. Don't come in the morning, 6 o'clock in the morning, find your track's frozen, and immediate instinct, track's rock hard, will harrow it to break it up. Don't. All you end up with there, if you do that, is big lumps of frozen sand that you can't unfreeze. Okay. First job, get your sand onto the track. Okay. Just to re-emphasize there, 2 kilograms per square meter, 200 grams per square foot. Get that sand onto the track. Then drive over the track as much as you can. Get a fleet of vehicles out there if you can. What happens when you drive over the track is you move the sand particles very, very slightly. Movement generates friction, which creates heat. On the very surface layer of the sand, you will actually start, after quite a long time, probably half an hour or so, you'll actually start to get the very, very surface layer of the ice to melt into water. At that point, the water will start to dissolve the salt, and that water will not refreeze. Without the salt, it will just refreeze straight away because the track's still cold. So that's critically important, really. And then you keep working away. Once you've got the visible water on the surface, you can sprinkle fresh water, literally sprinkle a light dusting of fresh water onto the surface of the track. That will start to soak into the deeper layers of the track. That will take the heat that you've generated and the salt with it. And then you just keep relentlessly driving over the track. Every now and again, maybe, if the track is starting to look dry on the surface, add a little bit more water, Eventually, you should get to a point where most of the sand has defrosted. It may be, I don't know the answer to this, it may be necessary to do some light harrowing at that point, I don't know, just of the surface layers, so that you can actually, the pressure of the tyres starts to move the salt in the deeper layers. I don't know, I suspect not. I do know that what you mustn't do is harrow the track into the levels where it's still frozen, because again you get big chunks that you just cannot break up. Once you have defrosted the whole track, then you can harrow it. Couple of points really. I've been saying to people, don't use salt, use brine. Does it work? Well, if you do some simple calculations, you find that brine just is not practical. We've already said 220 tons of sand on the track, 55 tons of water in that. We start with no salt in it. Suppose you want a 5% solution of salt in that to try and defrost it, well, it won't defrost it, as I say, to try and stop it freezing. If you apply that as brine, you've basically got to apply the same volume of water as 10% salt solution to end up with a 5% salt solution in the final mix. Some of the water will wash through, obviously. That means adding 55 tons of 10% salt solution to your track. That's 55,000 litres or 11,000 gallons of 10% salt solution. I'm really thinking that's not practical, to be honest. And the other thing is, brine will not unfreeze ice any more than salt itself does. Finally, is there a solution that can make this easier? Well, yes, I've already said if you're defrosting a track, the key is to keep driving over in it and getting a bit of movement into that sand. Now, the other thing that might help is, again, if we used all-weather tracks. If we had particles of rubber in that sand, then as you put pressure on it, you would actually get more movement. I think that would enable you to defrost tracks a lot quicker. Just to demonstrate again, our track is waterlogged. So again, passes the pen test very nicely. You'd say, well, that track seems fine to me. Slow movement, plenty of give in that. So you think, well, that's safe. Fast movement, hard. Slow movement, no support sideways there or back to front. Your paws are going to slip on that. A dangerous track.